Apparently the only thing keeping us from liberty is a few more ideas.
A few more ideas. I mean, it's so confusing, isn't it? So much going wrong, so much to say, and all of it happening so quickly. The pace of repression outstrips our ability to understand it, and that is the real trick of the imperial thought machine. It's easier to hide behind 40 atrocities than a single incident. But they have a fight on their hands, don't they? Like elemental rights are such a simple thing to hold, they will have to shake the galaxy awfully hard to loosen our grip.
Welcome back to the Dialectic Dose. I'm your host, Austin Constantino. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge how precarious the state of the world is right now. The US, along with Israel, have continued to escalate, break international law, warmonger, and assault Iran. The sheer amount of international law completely disregarded and broken at this point is too plentiful to even count. The lies, the obfuscation, the complete collapse of international law, of this belief in the West as arbiters of morality and ethics, the sanctity of institutions of law like the ICC and the ICJ, the moral perception and salience that the UN is allegedly supposed to have on matters of human progress and humanitarian capacity. And the only thing to really describe this as is the death throes of an empire, our empire. The collapse will not be sudden, I don't think. Don't think it will be one cataclysmic moment. I think it will be a series of collapses. And while I don't think it can be avoided at this point, while I do think the collapse of the empire is for certain, the reality is that the bigger they are, the harder they fall. And we are falling with it. The death throes of the empire are not just internationally experienced, they are growingly domestically experienced at far higher rates of state violence, oppression, and consolidation of power under the MAGA regime. That is not to say, however, that the Democrats and centrists and moderates, so-called, in our government are not immediately falling in line with Trump and his administration. 75 Democratic lawmakers have signed on to express their support for ICE and the continuing raids in cities all over the United States. The Democrats don't seem necessarily opposed to having bombed Iran as we recently have, but just that the decorum and processes to get Congress's buy-in was not respected. But even when they protest in this way, there's no energy behind it. We have seemingly walked by and made a passing glance at the fact that 2 Democratic lawmakers were murdered during Trump's military parade and the No Kings protest that erupted across the country, 5 million participants throughout the country. But this news of lawmakers being murdered in such a horrific way would certainly, well, let me not even get into it. The point is this: we all see it, we all know it's happening, and as you often hear in my podcast intro, it's all happening at once. So many things. The speed of oppression outpaces our ability to understand it, to understand what's going on, what's happening, where it's coming from, who's doing it, who's next, who's the next target. There's this reaction, an understandable one, but a reaction nonetheless, to retreat into our inner worlds of comfortable fiction, to look away and to believe that we can weather this. It's cognitive dissonance at work, obviously, and while it provides fleeting momentary comfort, one cannot deny that logically it's unsound. You've no evidence to believe this won't keep getting worse. You've no evidence to believe it won't happen to you. In fact, it's never been closer to happening to you. This world you so desperately wish we could go back to was itself upheld by violence and the blood of the global South, oiling the wheels of this capitalist machine that has allowed us to enjoy a rather mundane material existence inside the imperial core, not completely safe from the downwind disaster of living in an exploitative system such as the one we do. But even that world no longer exists. We are approaching the end, the logical end, the only end that was ever going to come to our empire. And it would behoove us to become increasingly aware of who our neighbors are and begin to build grassroots community. The superstructure, the state, all of it would like nothing more than for you to feel alienated right now, as it benefits off of your alienation. Now is the time to begin forming those relationships with your neighbors. Now is the time to begin having these conversations, plainly and openly, with no regard for the fantasy of brunch next Sunday, or the trip you've been saving up to go to, or the next season of your favorite television show. Now is the time to focus on resistance. And while I have so much more to say, really, about the geopolitical and international conditions of the world, because they are important, and they're truly the place where things begin before they arrive back to the imperial core. As much as I would like to talk about these things, I do have a duty to explain the manifestations of the superstructure. This is why I started the Dialectic Dose. And I want to make sure I've laid the foundational groundwork so that hopefully listeners can be equipped with the perception and the understanding of the water we swim in. And so that the proliferation of these emancipatory ideals can spread far and wide as a foundational understanding. We cannot resist what we do not understand, at least not effectively. And so, with all the going-ons in the world, I want to focus on the subject matter of this podcast episode, which I still think, very unfortunately, is as relevant now as it ever has been in our history. Today, we're going to talk about the armed wing of capital, about how police enforce class rule through violence.
All units in the area, please be advised. Suspect vehicle is heading towards the city centre.
We're in pursuit.
Stop road closures and deploy resources accordingly. Over.
We have explored capitalism's exploitation of workers, its imperial expansion across the globe, and its systematic destruction of the natural world. Today, we confront the institution that makes all of this possible: the police, capitalism's armed enforcers who maintain class rule through the barrel of a gun. Economic systems built on inherent subjugation and exploitation require violence to sustain themselves. Feudalism had knights and armies. Slavery had overseers and slave patrols. Capitalism has police, professional agents of state violence whose primary function involves protecting private property and suppressing resistance to economic exploitation. Yet we are told a different story. Police supposedly protect and serve communities. They maintain law and order, and they stand between civilization and chaos. Without police, we're warned, society would collapse into savage brutality as humans reveal their true, violent nature. These myths, and they are myths, obscure police's actual function: enforcing the economic relationships that concentrate wealth in the hands of the few, while keeping the many in line through fear, intimidation, and violence. Police don't prevent crime. They manage the social consequences of an economic system that creates poverty, desperation, and despair. Modern policing emerged directly from institutions designed to control enslaved and exploited populations. Slave patrols tracked down escaped human property. Private security forces broke strikes and intimidated organizers. Military units massacred indigenous peoples and workers to clear land for capitalist development or to shut down protests. These historical origins reveal police's essential character. They exist to protect capital, not communities. They serve the ruling class, not the working class. They enforce property relations, not public safety. Understanding this history destroys the myths that legitimize police power and reveals the class war police wage every day against working people. But police represent only the domestic face of capitalist violence. The same military-industrial complex that devastates foreign countries arms domestic police forces with weapons of war. The same surveillance technologies used to monitor global populations track activists and organizers at home. The same imperial logic that justifies occupying foreign territories justifies occupying poor neighborhoods and communities of color. Police embody capitalism's fundamental contradiction. A system based on exploitation requires ever-escalating violence to maintain itself. As inequality increases and as conditions worsen, as resistance grows, police become more and more militarized, more brutal, more willing to use lethal force against anyone who threatens capitalist order, and are held to less and less responsibility and culpability as their need to maintain order increases. Today, we dissect the armed wing of capital and reveal how police function as an occupying army in the service of ruling class interests. Police as we know them today did not exist for most of human history. Humans lived in communities for thousands of years without professional law enforcement agencies. When conflicts arose, communities resolved them through collective processes, restorative justice, or traditional authority structures. Crime existed, but it was addressed through social mechanisms rather than state violence. Modern policing emerged in the 19th century as capitalism required new forms of social control to manage the massive populations displaced by industrialization and the brutal exploitation of wage labor. The first police forces served specific capitalist functions, protecting private property, controlling dangerous classes, and suppressing resistance to economic oppression. In the American South, slave patrols represented the direct predecessor to modern policing. These armed groups hunted escaped slaves, prevented rebellions, and enforced the racial hierarchy that made plantation capitalism profitable. Slave patrols received legal authority to enter any premises, question any person, and use violence against anyone suspected of assisting escaped slaves. After the Civil War, many slave patrol members joined police forces that continued enforcing racial oppression through black codes, vagrancy laws, and convict leasing systems that recreated slavery under different names. Southern police departments maintained the same personnel and the same methods and the same function, protecting white property and suppressing black resistance. In northern industrial cities, police forces emerged to control immigrant workers, break strikes, and protect capitalist property from angry mobs. The first professional police department, established in London in 1829, was created specifically to manage the social unrest generated by industrial capitalism's devastation of traditional communities. Early American police forces, like those in New York and Boston, were established to suppress worker organizing, protect strikebreakers, and maintain order during periods of economic crisis. Police regularly attacked striking workers, arrested union organizers, and protected corporate property during labor disputes. The Great Railroad Strike of 1877 revealed police's true allegiance when they joined the National Guard units and federal troops in massacring striking workers across the country. A bit of American history you've probably never heard about. In Pittsburgh alone, soldiers killed dozens of workers and destroyed millions of dollars in working-class neighborhoods while protecting railroad property. These historical examples demonstrate that police were never designed to serve community interests. They emerged as capitalism's private army, funded by public money but serving private interests. Where have we heard this before? Their primary mission involved protecting the property of the wealthy while controlling the populations whose labor created that wealth. Indigenous communities faced genocidal violence from the military and police forces that cleared land for capitalist development. Indian removal policies required massive state violence to dispossess indigenous peoples of territories that mining companies, railroad corporations, and agricultural interests wanted to exploit. Police forces expanded westward alongside capitalist development, establishing the rule of property through violence against indigenous peoples, Mexican landowners, Chinese immigrants, and any other populations that interfered with capital accumulation. The greatest lie about police ever told claims they prevent chaos and maintain civilized society. According to this myth, humans are naturally violent, selfish creatures who would murder and steal without police surveillance and punishment. Law and order, supposedly, represent the thin blue line between civilization and savage brutality. This Hobbesian nightmare scenario serves ruling class interests by justifying massive expenditures on police and prisons while diverting attention from the systemic causes of social problems. If humans are naturally evil, then inequality, poverty, and desperation must result from individual moral failures rather than economic exploitation. Anthropological evidence destroys this myth completely. Humans evolved as cooperative social animals whose survival depended on mutual aid, resource sharing, and collective problem solving. The most violent periods in human history correspond to the emergence of class societies that concentrated resources in the hands of elites while forcing majorities into desperation. Indigenous societies that existed for thousands of years without police developed sophisticated methods for maintaining social harmony and resolving conflicts. These societies often had lower rates of interpersonal violence than modern capitalist societies, despite lacking professional law enforcement. Even today, the communities with the strongest social bonds, the most economic equality, and the greatest collective control over resources have the lowest crime rates. Crime correlates strongly with inequality, desperation, and social isolation, all products of capitalist social relations rather than inherent human nature. The myth of law and order also obscures the reality that police and legal systems create far more violence than they prevent. Police kill over 1,000 people annually in the United States alone, more than the total number of mass shooting victims. Prisons subject millions to systematic torture, sexual assault, and psychological devastation. The legal system tears apart families, destroys communities, and perpetuates cycles of trauma and violence. Mass incarceration demonstrates how law and order functions as a system of social control rather than public safety. The United States imprisons more people than any society in human history, and yet has smaller crime rates than countries with much smaller prison populations. This paradox reveals that prisons exist to manage surplus populations and extract profit rather than reduce crime. The war on drugs exemplifies how law enforcement creates crime rather than preventing it. Drug prohibition transforms medical and social problems into criminal justice issues while generating massive profits for police departments, prison corporations, and pharmaceutical companies that produce legal drugs. Meanwhile, the most destructive crimes, wage theft, environmental destruction, financial fraud, they rarely face meaningful prosecution because they're committed by the capitalist class that controls the legal system. Corporate executives who steal billions from workers' wages or poison entire communities rarely see prison cells, while poor people face years in prison for possessing small amounts of drugs. This selective enforcement reveals law's true function, protecting ruling class interests while criminalizing working class survival strategies. Law and order mean order for capital and law for workers. Police serve capital in ways both obvious and subtle, from breaking picketing lines to evicting families from foreclosed homes. Every police action ultimately protects property relations that concentrate wealth in capitalist hands while keeping workers dependent on wage labor for survival. When homeless encampments face clearing operations, police enforce the artificial scarcity that makes housing profitable for real estate speculators. When striking workers face arrests for blocking traffic, police protect corporate profits by forcing workers back into exploitative conditions. When environmental activists face prosecution for trespassing, police prioritize corporate access to natural resources over democratic participation in decisions affecting entire communities. The legal concept of private property itself requires constant police violation to maintain. Without armed enforcement, the fiction that tiny minorities can own vast territories, factories, and resources while majorities work for survival wages would collapse instantly. Property relations appear natural only because police violence makes alternatives unthinkable. Police departments receive direct funding from corporations through public-private partnerships that blur the lines between the state and capital. Business improvement districts hire private security that coordinates with public police to clear undesirable populations from commercial areas. Corporations sponsor police equipment, training, and facilities in exchange for preferential treatment. The revolving door between police departments and private security firms ensures that personnel serve corporate interests whether they work for public agencies or private companies. Police chiefs become corporate security directors. Corporate executives join police advisory boards. Military contractors provide training, equipment, and strategic planning for both foreign and domestic operations. Police also serve capital by managing the social consequences of economic exploitation without addressing the root causes. Homelessness, drug addiction, mental health crisis, and interpersonal violence all correlate strongly with economic inequality and social isolation created by capitalist competition. Rather than providing housing, healthcare, education, or meaningful employment, capitalist societies respond to these problems through policing and imprisonment. This approach ensures that symptoms of economic exploitation never threaten the system creating them, while generating profits for police departments, prison corporations, and related industries. The school-to-prison pipeline exemplifies this dynamic by turning educational institutions into training grounds for prison and police state acceptance. Schools in poor communities increasingly resemble prisons, complete with metal detectors, surveillance cameras, and armed guards. Students learn to accept constant monitoring, arbitrary authority, and punishment for minor infractions. Meanwhile, wealthy schools provide enriching educational experiences that prepare students for leadership roles in maintaining capitalist society. This educational apartheid ensures that working-class children learn submission while ruling-class children learn domination. Police presence in schools criminalizes normal childhood behavior when it occurs in poor communities, while similar behavior in wealthy communities receives counseling or therapeutic intervention. This differential treatment reproduces class and racial hierarchies through the criminal legal system. The line between police and military has dissolved as domestic law enforcement adopts the equipment, tactics, and mindset of occupying armies. This militarization reflects capitalism's increasing reliance on violence to maintain control as economic inequality reaches extreme levels and resistance movements grow stronger. The Pentagon's 1033 program transfers billions of dollars worth of military equipment to local police departments, including armored vehicles, aircraft, weaponry, and surveillance technology originally designed for foreign battlefields. Small-town police departments now possess equipment more sophisticated than many national militaries. This military equipment transforms police departments into paramilitary forces that view communities as enemy territory, requiring conquest and control. Military tactics designed for foreign enemies get applied to domestic populations, especially communities of color and poor neighborhoods that police departments treat as occupied territories. SWAT teams exemplify this militarization by conducting over 80,000 raids annually, mostly for drug offenses that could be handled through simple arrests. These paramilitary units use military tactics involving flashbang grenades, battering rams, and automatic weapons against civilians in their homes. SWAT raids regularly result in deaths of innocent people, including children, elderly individuals, and people with disabilities who cannot comply with shouted commands during chaotic raids. Police departments treat these killings as acceptable casualties in their war against poor communities. The militarization extends beyond equipment to training and mindset. Police receive training from Israeli military forces that specialize in controlling occupied Palestinian populations. You heard that right. This training teaches American police to view domestic communities through the lens of counterinsurgency warfare. Surveillance technology developed for foreign intelligence operations now monitors domestic populations through facial recognition systems, license plate readers, cell phone tracking, and predictive policing algorithms. These technologies enable police departments to track individuals' movements, associations, and activities without warrants or oversight. Predictive policing algorithms trained on biased historical data direct police to heavily patrol communities of color while ignoring white-collar crime in wealthy neighborhoods. This technological bias reinforces existing patterns of discriminatory enforcement while providing the appearance of objective, scientific policing. Social media monitoring allows police departments to track activists, organizers, and anyone who criticizes police violence. These surveillance operations chill free speech and political organizing, while providing intelligence for disrupting resistance movements. The Fusion Center system connects local police departments with federal intelligence agencies, military units, and corporate security forces. This integration creates a unified surveillance and control apparatus that treats domestic dissent as a national security threat requiring military response. Police departments recruit primarily from working-class communities, transforming class allies into class enemies through systematic psychological conditioning that destroys solidarity and empathy while promoting identification with ruling class interests. Police academy training resembles military boot camp. It's designed to break down individual identity and rebuild recruits as loyal enforcers of state authority. This training emphasizes obedience to orders, us versus them mentality, and contempt for civilians who question police authority. Recruits learn to see themselves as warriors, protecting society from dangerous criminals, rather than community members serving public safety. This warrior mentality justifies violence against anyone who resists police authority, while positioning police as heroes deserving special privileges and protections. Training programs like Killology explicitly teach police to overcome natural human reluctance to kill other humans. And yes, it is literally referred to as Killology. These programs promote the view that hesitation in using lethal force represents weakness that threatens officer survival and public safety. Police culture reinforces this conditioning through informal socialization that punishes officers who question department practices or show sympathy for community concerns. The blue wall of silence, so-called, ensures that officers who report misconduct face ostracism, harassment, and career destruction. This cultural pressure forces police to choose between maintaining their jobs and maintaining their humanity. Most choose to suppress empathy and critical thinking in favor of group loyalty and financial security. This is why it doesn't matter if someone seeks to be a good cop. You can't be a good cop in a bad system. Police work attracts working-class people seeking economic security, social status, and legitimate authority in societies that offer few paths to dignity and respect. Police departments exploit these legitimate desires by offering steady employment, comprehensive benefits, and social prestige in exchange for enforcing ruling class rule. The economic incentives are substantial. Police officers often earn middle-class wages with excellent benefits and job security that most working-class jobs lack. Overtime opportunities, pension plans, and healthcare coverage provide economic stability that capitalism denies to most workers. However, this economic security comes at the cost of class solidarity. Police cannot simultaneously serve working-class interests and enforce capitalist property relations. Their economic dependence on the state makes them loyal enforcers of the system that exploits their former class allies. Police also receive psychological benefits from their role as authorized users of violence. In societies that otherwise render working-class people powerless, police work provides legitimate authority and social status. This authority becomes addictive, especially for individuals who felt powerless in previous circumstances. The authority to use violence, arrest people, and make life-altering decisions appeals to individuals seeking control and respect, warped though it is. Police work attracts some people who want to help their communities as well, but it transforms them into agents of oppression through institutional pressures and occupational socialization. Some police officers maintain their humanity and attempt to serve community interests, but institutional pressures make this increasingly difficult. Officers who refuse to participate in unjust enforcement face punishment from supervisors, ostracism from colleagues, and potential termination. Reform-minded officers either adapt to department culture or leave policing entirely. The institutional structure ensures that police departments select for individuals willing to use violence against community members while weeding out those who prioritize justice over order. This selection process creates police forces composed largely of individuals who either lack empathy or have learned to suppress it in favor of institutional loyalty. The result is an occupying force that shares class origins with community members, but serves ruling class interests exclusively. Police power extends far beyond local departments to encompass a vast apparatus of state violence that includes federal agencies, immigration enforcement, military units, and intelligence services. These agencies coordinate to suppress resistance and maintain capitalist order through specialized forms of repression. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, functions as a deportation force that terrorizes immigrant communities while providing cheap, exploitable labor for capitalist enterprises. ICE raids separate families, destroy communities, and create fear that keeps immigrant workers from organizing for better conditions. ICE serves capital by maintaining a vulnerable population that accepts substandard wages and dangerous working conditions rather than risk deportation. Immigration enforcement creates artificial labor shortages that drive down wages while providing employers with workers who cannot report violations of labor laws. The Department of Homeland Security coordinates domestic surveillance and repression through agencies that target activists, organizers, and anyone who threatens capitalist stability. DHS transforms local police departments into intelligence-gathering units that monitor political activity and report to federal agencies. The FBI's domestic intelligence operations continued the COINTELPRO tradition of disrupting social movements through surveillance, infiltration, and provocation. FBI agents infiltrate activist groups, encourage illegal activities, and arrest organizers for crimes the FBI itself orchestrated. The Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA, maintains the drug war that criminalizes millions of people while protecting pharmaceutical corporations' monopoly on psychoactive substances. The DEA coordinates with local police to conduct military-style raids against nonviolent drug users while ignoring corporate drug dealers who cause far more harm. State and federal fusion centers coordinate intelligence sharing between law enforcement agencies, military units, and corporate security forces. These centers treat social movements, environmental activists, and economic justice organizers as potential terrorists requiring surveillance and disruption. Private military contractors like Academy, formerly Blackwater, blur the lines between police, military, and corporate security forces. These companies provide training, equipment, and personnel for both foreign military operations and domestic policing, ensuring that tactics developed for imperial conquest get applied to domestic populations. The National Guard serves as a military force for domestic deployment against striking workers, civil rights activists, and anyone who threatens property relations. National Guard units regularly deploy to break strikes, to suppress protests, and maintain order during periods of social unrest. School police forces introduce children to constant surveillance and punishment while channeling students from classrooms to prison cells. School police arrest students for behaviors that previously received educational interventions, creating criminal records that follow young people throughout their lives. Campus police at universities serve to suppress student activism while protecting university investments and corporate partnerships. These forces coordinate with local and federal agencies to monitor student organizations and disrupt protests that threaten corporate interest. The Transportation Security Administration, the TSA, and Border Patrol forces normalize surveillance and submission to authority while creating the infrastructure for expanded state control. These agencies condition populations to accept arbitrary searches, detention, and harassment as necessary for security. Private security forces coordinate with public police to protect corporate property while avoiding constitutional restrictions that apply to government agencies. These forces provide plausible deniability for corporate repression while maintaining close ties with public law enforcement. The state's monopoly on legitimate violence represents capitalism's most fundamental requirement for maintaining class rule. This monopoly ensures that only agents of the ruling class can use violence legally, while criminalizing defensive violence by exploited populations. Police embody this monopoly by claiming exclusive authority to determine when violence is justified, who deserves protection, and how conflict should be resolved. This authority allows police to kill community members with minimal consequences while treating any resistance to police violence as terrorism. The legal system reinforces this monopoly by granting police qualified immunity that shields them from prosecution for violence that would be criminal if committed by civilians. Police can destroy property, assault people, steal, and kill with impunity, as long as they claim to be performing official duties. Stand your ground laws exemplify how the legal system protects ruling class violence while criminalizing working class self-defense. These laws allow property owners to kill people who threaten their property, but deny the same right to people defending themselves against police violence. The monopoly on violence extends to defining what constitutes crime and how society responds to harmful behavior. The ruling class criminalizes activities that threaten their interests while legalizing far more destructive activities that generate profits. Property destruction by protests receives harsh punishment, while environmental destruction by corporations faces minimal consequences. Drug dealing by poor people triggers lengthy prison sentences, while drug dealing by pharmaceutical companies generates massive profits. Violence by police maintains order, while violence against police constitutes terrorism. This selective application of law reveals that crime is a political category rather than a moral one. Activities become criminal when they threaten ruling class interests, regardless of their actual harm to communities. The state's monopoly on violence also extends to international relations, where military forces protect American capital investments while destroying countries that threaten corporate profits. Military interventions and police repression serve identical functions in different contexts. Military aid to foreign police forces and training programs create international networks of repression that share tactics, technology, data, and intelligence for suppressing resistance movements worldwide. These programs ensure that domestic and foreign repression reinforce each other. The weapons and surveillance technologies developed for military conquest abroad inevitably return home to be used against domestic populations. This boomerang effect means that imperial violence abroad generates police violence at home as part of the same system of capitalist control. Okay, we've traced police from their origin as slave catchers and strike breakers through their modern role as capitalism's armed enforcers. This analysis reveals that police reform cannot address fundamental problems because police function exactly as designed, to protect capital and control workers through violence. Police abolition offers the only path toward genuine public safety because it addresses root causes of social problems rather than managing their symptoms through violence. Abolition means divesting from police and prisons while investing in housing, healthcare, education, and economic justice that eliminate conditions creating crime. Communities that have experimented with police abolition demonstrate that mutual aid, restorative justice, and collective problem-solving provide better outcomes than punishment and incarceration. These alternatives work because they address human needs rather than protecting property relations. Abolition also requires transforming economic relationships that create inequality, desperation, and social isolation. We cannot eliminate police without eliminating capitalism, because class society requires armed enforcers to maintain exploitation. The movements building alternatives to police and capitalism demonstrate that other worlds are possible. Community defense groups protect vulnerable populations without reproducing state violence. Mutual aid networks meet human needs without profit motives. And restorative justice processes heal harm without punishment. Police abolition and capitalism abolition represent this same struggle because both institutions serve ruling class interests through violence and exploitation. Building movements capable of challenging police power requires understanding how police function as capitalism's armed wing. The choice before us mirrors previous episodes: reform or revolution, management or transformation, continued exploitation or collective liberation. Police will never serve community interests because their institutional function requires serving capital instead. Marx taught us that every class society contains the seeds of its own destruction. Police violence radicalizes communities and demonstrates that the state serves capital rather than people. Our task involves organizing those communities into movements powerful enough to build alternatives that serve life rather than profit. The future depends on our willingness to imagine and create societies based on cooperation rather than domination, mutual aid rather than exploitation, and collective care rather than individual accumulation. Police abolition points toward that future by eliminating the armed enforcers who make capitalism possible. Until next time, this has been the Dialectic Dose. I'm your host, Austin Constantino, reminding you that true public safety requires abolishing the institutions that make us unsafe: police, prisons, and capitalism itself.